that you somehow departed. I don't know whether you agree with that or not, but it seems to me that you somehow departed from permaculture. Uh, it looks to me that permaculture, as a movement, has its fingers all over you, not to let you go. But it seems to me that in your career, you use permaculture, but you kind of departed from all of that stuff, and you just doing your own thing, which is what Bill did. You know? So he got a whole bunch of whole bunch of things, and with David, and then systematized this thing. And instead of just copying that, you went out and did the same thing with other tools and other complementary tools and other, would you say that that's a true statement, that you somehow departed from permaculture?
Yeah, so it's a really interesting question, and I think that I didn't get invited to the Australian Permaculture Convergence this year directly. I got a sort of a generic email, as a lot of people in the movement would have, and that's probably a reflection of I don't know, the noise that I've made, or the lack of contribution I've made to the permaculture movement in the last few years. People need to realise, I suppose, that my original place in all of this was more in Keyline than anything else, and it was also in Fukuoka. I mean, I read in 1988, I think it was. I read Fukuoka's One Straw Revolution, and that was a really pivotal piece. It wasn't until I read, I think, Fukuoka's third book that I even heard of Bill Mollison or permaculture, because there was a photo of Wes Jackson, Bill Mollison, and Fukuoka. I think it was in Regaining the Paradise Lost, in his third book, and I sort of went, "Oh, there's an Aussie. I don't know who's this Aussie guy." And then Permaculture magazine was in the newsagents and all of that, so I started to look at it and went, "Oh yeah, this is interesting." There was a really good magazine back in the day called the Permaculture Edge, which for me was where it was more at, because, and I think this is part of why I won't say left permaculture, but just didn't have the same sort of enrichment from it, was that it just seemed like it was it's as I said to Bill Mollison, permaculture is becoming a franchise, and he didn't like that. In fact, he got pretty pissed with me when I said it to him, but that's the way I saw it, because it was that. It is, and it's still to extent is, like I talked about before, there's this sort of signature stamp design, as my old late friend Joe Palacia called the permaculture holy cows, and I just got a bit tired of trying to reflect on that, and I saw that within the permaculture movement there was a lack of ability. Broadly, I'm generalizing here, there was a lack of ability for people to engage in critical feedback, and I found that was because there was a Holmgrenian side. There's a Holmgrenian side, if you like, to permaculture, and there's and this is the same with most movements. People follow a lineage. That's why you've got Catholicism, you've got Jesuits within that, then you've got Lutherans. You've got all these people who follow a leader, and understanding that and the phenomena that comes from that is that people who follow David Holmgren as a permaculturalist tend to, in my experience, tend to be more open to feedback, because he's actually got that as a principle.
Yeah.
And if you know David, as I do as a friend, that's the kind of person he is. He's up for that sort of robustness. Whereas Bill, from my experience, whilst he was up for the robustness, he was also a fairly defensive person when it came to critique. And that follows through, as I've seen, with a lot of the people who I would call Mollisonian permaculturalists. I'm generalising, of course, but I have seen this quite frequently. I mean, I've had my some pretty open public spats with people like Jeff Lawton and others who, in Australian rules football, they're the kind of people who, once you get into the argument, they play the man, not the ball. And Jeff's a really good example of that. And I just thought, look, mate, if you cannot if you can't just focus on, I think we were talking about roads or something like that. I mean, why would you attack someone personally and their character when you're talking about a road, as opposed to just talk about the road, you know? And I just started to see more and more of that, and I thought, I just can't be bothered with all this shit. So apart from which, you know, I have a lot of friends who would classify themselves as permaculturalists, but I really did see that permaculture, so it sort of worked for us for the time, but it was because we hadn't developed our own identity. It was almost like we were growing up through this period, the first 10 or 15 years of our development as a company and so on. We were growing up in these various communities. Some of it was conventional agriculture, some of it was farm forest. I mean, I'm very, very much involved in the farm forestry movement and the agroforestry movement. That's got nothing to do with permaculture largely. And so on. So I've been involved with all these other movements, and it wasn't until really, I think, when we started to develop the Regen Ag, or the carbon farming program, which I developed in 2007-8. When I developed that, that was the genesis of it, because that was where I started to went, holistic management, Keyline, permaculture, mycology from Paul Stamets and others, Elaine Ingham stuff. And I started to put all of this together and go, okay, there's something fundamentally different about this. And then using Yeoman's scale of permanence, that was the gel that sort of, because again, permaculture, I couldn't see an A to Z. There was no, and that's what I was really lacking as a process sort of person. And Bill Mollison asked me to write a book on permaculture process, because he could see that that's the kind of person I was. I'd take a job and I'd go, and I had an A to a Z.
I was about to ask that, because you have a systematic way of thinking.
Sure.
That you can put holistic management, which is already interdisciplinary in itself, and you can take permaculture, which also like it's got a whole bunch. It's a toolbox, not a tool.
Yeah.
And you can take these two and put them in an even greater toolbox. So it takes a lot of thinking behind it. And I think I come from a cultural background in Brazil. I've been teaching martial arts for 20 years. People want to copy. They want you to come and say, this is it, do this way, do that way, do this way, do that. But they don't want to do what you did. I think it's thinking about permaculture the way that Bill Mollison thought about it, which is, what are my tools? What is it available to me that I can do something according to the context with it? And I think that's a hallmark of your work, is sort of, okay, each tool for each job, or each set of tools for each job, and that sort of stuff. And most people in permaculture, they want to come and just do the herbal spiral, do the swales, it's a cookie cutter.
Yeah, it can be, and that is generalization, of course, but unfortunately that exists. And I could just see that permaculture was becoming like that, and it became so much less focused on ethics and principles, particularly design principles. Because I thought that whilst the ethics are noble, one of the things that I really started to think a lot more about, especially with my reading and theology and so on, was I really didn't want to get into the space where, because I thought the imposition of ethics on people and saying, all right, well, thou must follow these ethics. I found that, well, for me at least, sort of took away from the prospect of self-determination. And I've had, again, these discussions with some permaculturalists out there where I want to focus on the individual. I mean, ultimately, it's individuals who make decisions. Yes, we do it in community frameworks and all of the rest of it, but ultimately, communities are made up of individuals. And from my perspective, the best thing I can do is work with individuals in their community context, or in their social context, and say, all right, well, what is going to make you happy? You have to ultimately, as an adult, make your own decisions about what makes you ethically happy. I can't say that you've got to care for the earth, you've got to care for the people, you've got to return to surplus or whatever. I mean, they're imposed ethics on people. I would rather that people come up with their own ethics. And yes, they're very likely to come up with something similar, but I just felt that the ethics for me started to become an imposition, and further to that, what happened with a lot of people in permaculture and still does is that the design principles, which I think are fantastic, both Holmgrenian and Mollisonian, and some of the others that people have developed out there, particularly people like Toby Hemingway, who was a good friend, and I'm very much respected Toby. Their principles, I think, are really great, but they're not the only ecological design principles out there. And this is the other thing that I find there's a hubris within permaculture, what I call perma-appropriation. And that's a play on words, because you'll probably notice that so many people are perma this and perma that. I mean, they perma everything to everything. And it's like, oh, really? Can you be a bit more original? And can you stop appropriating the work of other people's, call it permaculture if it was if those people came up with it within the prism of permaculture thought. But if they didn't, then I think it's a bit disingenuous and incorrect to appropriate it as permaculture, because that's not where the idea sprung from. I mean, so I find, and I just found a lot of that to be just a bit boring, really. And so, yeah, and then of course it was kind of like I grew up. It's a bit like that, you know. Permaculture was a really nice uncle to have, and a good apprenticing framework, I suppose. And sometimes what you're going to do in the development of your own mastery, which I'll certainly not say that I've got to yet, but in the development of that, if you think about things enough, well, then you self-determine, and I have, and a lot of other people seem to have resonated with that. They find that the Regrarians platform that we've developed is very useful, but it's absolutely not dogmatic. I mean, you can do whatever the hell you like, and that's something that I really didn't want to go down, because I looked at all of this cookie cutter, iconoclastic sort of behaviours that were going on, where people were being put up on pedestals and, you know, blah blah blah, and people started to get deified. And I think that's a really dangerous place to get to, because again, it takes away from individual thought, or it takes the power out of individuals to think for themselves and question of themselves what they really need to do. And so that's the way we sort of rode.
There is one catch there, Darren, which is, again, my background teaching. And I've done the same in martial arts, which is very hard, which is people want you to give them a recipe book. So I didn't, and I've got friends, same sort of generation that I am, and they drill their students. And what happens is they've got a bigger cohort of people working with them, because people just feel safer. That are going, look, I'm with you, but you've got to figure this out for yourself. Here are the cards, and we'll work this out together. Some people will go with that. Most people won't. They want the drill. They want
they want to start at card 1 and go to card 52 in that order.
Yeah, that's right.